This is the Fair Districts Huddle. It's our May huddle. We've been doing these huddles monthly for quite a long time now, and we are excited to have Mike Curtin joining us. And I'm going to share my screen just for a second. Then Catherine is going to introduce Mike. Sorry, 1 second. Get to the top of my presentation. All righty, here we go. So it's our all volunteer huddle. We're going to have a Q&A and a discussion with Mike Curtin. And then we're going to do our volunteer appreciation, which we are particularly excited about, and talk to you about some upcoming events. And really with that, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine to introduce Mike, and I'm going to take this off the screen and just spotlight you guys here. So here we go. Spotlighting Mike and Catherine.
So we were hoping to have the picture of the congressional map behind.
Okay. 1 second, I'm going to mute folks. I do not know why. 1 second. Oh, so do you want that at the same time?
Just for his intro,
Okay,
for his intro,
very
please.
Good. 1 second. There we go.
I would like to introduce you all to Mike Curtin. Some of you know him well and know his writing well. I've admired Mike for a long time. He is a long-term veteran newsman. He's somebody who was the editor of the Columbus Dispatch. And when he was a state rep, he was a wonderful advocate. And he participated in the Ohio Constitutional Modernization Commission. And I think when we think about someone, someone who has this wonderful historical knowledge, that is Mike Curtin. He is the co-author of the Ohio Politics Almanac. And I invited him today because he had this lovely op-ed that highlighted Ohio's long history of gerrymandering going back to the Whigs. And I thought, hey, this is a really different way of thinking about gerrymandering. A lot of times we think about that political cartoon, but let's learn a little bit more today about gerrymandering's history in Ohio. And with that, Mike, do you want to add any other details about yourself?
I spent nearly 40 years at the Dispatch. Catherine, most of those years were devoted to the coverage of local and state government, local and state politics, local and state public policy. So as a retired newsman, I'm trying to stay active in it, writing where I can. And so thanks for highlighting some of my work. And this year, there's no more work important than this. So I'm gratified to take part in this discussion today.
Well, thank you much. Tell us a little bit about Ohio's history.
Well, gerrymandering is as old as our nation itself. It goes all the way back to the beginning when John Adams was writing the Constitution of the state of Massachusetts, and he tried to warn us about what gerrymandering would do. And of course, he was right. The evil is as old as our nation. And in Ohio, gerrymandering is as old as our state itself. Our first constitution, Ohio's first constitution of 1802, gave the General Assembly absolute authority to draw both state legislative and congressional district lines. Ohio's second constitution in 1851 was already spotting problems, and so it attempted to reform the process of drawing state legislative districts by creating an entity called the State Apportionment Board, which effectively was controlled by three statewide offices: governor, auditor, and secretary of state. Whichever party controlled two of those three offices drew our state legislative districts for decades and decades. So after 1851, the General Assembly had the power to gerrymander congressional districts and did so. And the State Apportionment Board had the power to gerrymander state legislative districts and did so. In the interest of time, I will not recite bout by bout, blow by blow, the many instances of gerrymandering over the decades by both major parties, although in the Q&A, I'm happy to respond to any era you might be interested in. but trust that over the long sweep of Ohio history, no party has had clean hands. Power is power is like alcohol, drugs, and everything else, addictive, and gerrymandering proves it over the decades. Unfortunately, there are no federal standards that apply to political gerrymandering, except that districts must have nearly equal populations, and those are requirements that go back to the 1960s. So without a federal standard, the constant battle to curb the evil of gerrymandering must be waged state by state, and is so now. In Ohio, the most blatant gerrymandering of our state's history of both congressional districts and state legislative maps occurred in the periods immediately following the two most recent federal censuses, the census of 2010 and the census of 2020. Driven by the ever more polarized nature of our politics and the development of ever more sophisticated computers and map-making software, the abuses have become more and more flagrant. The congressional map adopted by State House Republicans following the 2010 census was one of the most blatant adopted by any state in our nation's history. Many on this call will remember the snake on the lake stretching from Toledo to Cleveland. That was only one of the horribly drawn, most blatantly drawn districts in that map. The resulting uproar fueled a bipartisan reform effort. And in 2015, Ohio voters approved an amendment to reform the drawing of state legislative districts. That was a reform sponsored by both parties. And in 2018, in another reform sponsored by both parties, Ohio voters approved an amendment to reform the drawing of congressional districts. Because those amendments of 2015 and 2018 had the support of both major political parties, and they were promising reforms, both amendments were approved with well over 70% of the vote. And most of us on this call and across Ohio thought we were on the path to getting truly representative districts at that point. Well, in retrospect, because neither amendment created a truly independent redistricting commission, we were disappointed again, as our grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents have been disappointed over the long sweep of Ohio history. The majority party in control after those censuses simply reneged on the promise of reform. Fatal flaws in both amendments turned out to be that they left the General Assembly ultimately in control of the process, and they denied the Ohio Supreme Court the power to prepare its own plans in the event of an impasse among the parties. As we sit here today, Ohio's congressional districts and its state legislative districts are districts that in January of 2022 were declared unconstitutional by the Ohio Supreme Court. I think it's an important point as we go forward to November to remind Ohioans, you are sitting in unconstitutional districts, and the General Assembly simply didn't care. The majority party simply ignored multiple Supreme Court rulings and waited for a change in the court's composition, which took place in the November election of 2022. So here we are. We have historic supermajorities in the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate, one party controlling the House 66-32 and the controlling the Senate 26-7. Supermajorities that are historic in the history of the General Assembly and simply do not reflect the political balance of Ohio. Those supermajorities are the products of gerrymandering, pure and simple. They do not reflect the makeup of Ohio. It's clear to almost everybody on this call, thank you for your volunteerism, your hard work. It's clear that we will never erase the scourge of gerrymandering in our state unless we take the power to draw districts away from the state house politicians, which is what this initiative is all about. That's why the proposed amendment will create an independent Citizens Redistricting Commission that a number of other states have already done and have helped influence the shape of our amendment. If approved this November, it would create an independent, truly independent 15-member commission, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, 5 independents to draw both our state legislative maps and our congressional district maps. Current politicians, political party officials, candidates, or anyone who served or ran for office in the prior 6 years would be prohibited from serving on the commission. A bipartisan panel of retired Ohio judges would oversee the process of making sure independent citizens who do not have conflicts of interest and who are compromise-oriented and fair-minded would be seated on the panel. And of major critical importance, a key tenet, a key fundamental requirement of this amendment would be that the proportion of districts that favors each political party shall correspond closely to the statewide partisan preferences of the voters of Ohio. There are many secret ingredients in this, not secret, there are many plain ingredients in this proposal. It's detailed, but it's easy to read, would ensure that we would finally get a chance to have districts that represent all of us if we can approve this amendment in November. And that's why I'm on board and working hard along with the rest of you to try to enact this historic reform in November. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm happy to fly at 10,000 feet or go into the weeds as you would like on any particular question that may be of interest if I'm able to answer them.
Well, I thought we would start out with something that, as we collect signatures, we've all been fine-tuning how we talk about gerrymandering. But I was interested, do you have a quick way that you explain gerrymandering to someone who's never heard of it?
Yes, the map you see over my right shoulder, I carry in a smaller form with me everywhere I go. I do a lot of presentations at senior centers, nursing homes, and so forth. Why? Because they always have a need for speakers. They all have programs of bringing information in on current topics. And I have found over my experience that the old adage of a picture's worth 1,000 words is truly correct. So when I take this map of Ohio's current 15 districts around, it's not hard to explain that a district like our 5th district that stretches from counties along the Indiana border all the way to Lorain County in the Cleveland media market makes no sense. That makes no sense to the average 4th grader. Everyone can understand what a map of compact districts that respect communities of interest looks like. That map doesn't do it. And so whether you take with you a map of the congressional districts, or if it's more germane to carry a map of your own current House district, state House district, or state Senate district, I would encourage you to examine what particular map of what district or set of districts speaks most clearly to the problem of gerrymandering. Everyone understands a misshapen map. This map is full of misshapen districts that meander all over the place that don't make sense to your average 4th grader. And so I always start with a map and go from there. And in terms of the easiest verbiage to use, it's that gerrymandering purely and simply is a mathematically driven process to inflate the value of the votes of the party in power and to deflate the value of the party out of power. That's been that way since the founding. And only we can solve the problem because it's clearly apparent that those in power, whatever party happens to be in power at any particular time in history, will not solve the problem for us.
So I was really interested, that manipulation of district lines having this long history in Ohio. Could you tell us a little bit about, the Whigs? And I was really taken by, when you said, hey, no party has clean hands in this, including parties that no longer exist.
Yes, well, the party that was in power at the founding of our statehood was the Democratic Republican Party of Thomas Jefferson. Over time, especially when the Jacksonian Democrats were in control and during the height of the power of Andrew Jackson, the Republican name was dropped and the Democratic Republican Party became the Democratic Party as we know it today. The other party was the Federalist Party. Well, as the Federalist Party waned and disappeared, up rose the Whigs to replace it. And so in the 1830s and 40s, the two parties that contested for offices in Ohio primarily were the Democrats and the Whigs. The Republican Party, as we know it, the party of Abraham Lincoln, did not achieve any real success until 1856. 1856 is cited in our history books as the founding year of the Republican Party. And of course, 4 years later, Abraham Lincoln is elected president. So prior to the birth of the Republican Party, it was a contest between the Democrats and the Whigs, and the Democrats had the upper hand in the General Assembly. And so they drew maps that packed Whigs into as few districts as possible. And this was in the early 1840s. The Whigs decided to basically boycott the General Assembly, the sessions of the General Assembly, so that the Democrats would not have a quorum to enact the maps that they drew. And that was the first real shootout statewide between two parties, the two major parties of our state, over a gerrymandering battle in 1842, 1843. And the Whigs stymied the Democratic effort to gerrymander them simply by abandoning their seats, not showing up, so that the Democrats will not have the quorum to enact legislation to put their maps in place.
Wow. So I was also interested in something that you wrote about William McKinley. Can you tell us a little bit about how he was impacted by gerrymandering, and a little bit about who he was for those of us that don't spend a lot of time thinking that far back in time?
Well, before William McKinley was our governor and before he was our president, he was a member of Congress from Ohio, from the Canton area. And in 1890, he lost his reelection to Congress because of gerrymandering. He was a Republican, and the Democrats redrew his district, so he could not win it. He lost. And then in the subsequent election, he was elected governor. And in his inaugural address, promised to cure the problem of gerrymandering. And he tried, but he did not succeed, as so many have not succeeded over the decades. And so William McKinley, because he is a former president, probably is the leading iconic example of doesn't matter who you are, if your party is not in control of the map making process, you can be left by the wayside by gerrymander. And he was in 1890. Tried to do something about it when he became governor, but couldn't get the reform done. So here we are in 2024 trying to make good on William McKinley's promise to end gerrymandering in our state.
Well, that makes me think about the fact that we don't, not only do we have a long history of gerrymandering, but we are a state that has a long history of reform efforts. And I was just thinking back to, the 1981 reform effort, the very first one. Can you give us a little history about, folks trying to go to the ballot, trying to use using direct democracy in an attempt to actually fight gerrymandering?
That was the FAIR plan. And the League of Women Voters of Ohio were at the forefront of that effort. Joan Lawrence, a Republican, longtime state legislator, was at the forefront with a lot of other women, leading women of both parties in our state in the league, trying to push through that reform in 1981. And did not get it done. But it's a testimony to the long-standing efforts of the Ohio League of Women Voters from both parties, women going way back, who understand that nobody's hands have been clean, that both parties have been guilty over the ages. And if we're going to win this in November, which I think we will, it will be because this will resonate with people who appreciate history, who appreciate the obvious, if you will, that those in power at the State House will not do this on their own. It's up to us, and we have a great opportunity to do it this November.
Well, there is something amazing about how persistent redistricting reformers are. And this just a great group of people to hang out with, a great group of people to continue to fight to ensure that we have fair districts. And I'm just, really glad we're having this conversation. One of the things that I worry about, and this goes back to, whether it's the Reform Ohio Now or the 2012 Voters First, I worry about how do we attract more conservative folks to support this measure, or the folks that would be more aligned with the political party in power.
I would point to the other states that have enacted independent redistricting commissions and those that are working alongside us to do this in their own states. And these are, Arizona led the way in 2000 with an independent redistricting commission, California in 2008, Colorado in 2018, Michigan in 2018. This is an effort that spans ideological divides, because when people take a look at this issue and they see the rampant razor sharp partisanship on all of these issues of import, and they see the meltdown of Congress, a Congress that has an 8% approval rating now with the most recent Gallup polls. Gallup for decades has asked Americans to express their level of confidence in our major societal institutions. And this past year, Gallup reported that only 8% of Americans reported a great deal or a fair amount of confidence in Congress. It's never been that low. And what's that a reflection of? It's a reflection of citizen disdain over what this razor sharp partisanship has brought us. It's in all states. It runs from deep red to deep blue, and it's up to us to solve it. And I think that is another strong talking point. The people understand Congress is broken, and they understand that so many of our state houses are broken. We can't talk about reasonable gun safety. We can't talk about protecting our cities with home rule that we've had since 1912. We're seeing repeated attacks trying to strip our municipalities of powers they've had for well over 100 years. And on and on and on, where public policy, both in Congress and our state house, is driven from the extremes, not being driven from the middle. When I covered the General Assembly back in the 80s, I was assigned to cover the General Assembly back in 82, when Jim Rhodes was on his way out and Dick Celeste was on his way in. We had a General Assembly of Republicans, Democrats working together. We didn't have this razor sharp partisanship. And that's gone, and people understand it's gone. And it doesn't have to be gone forever. We can bring back moderation. We can bring back centrism. We can bring back compromise. Most Americans want that. We're not going to bring it back if we can't solve this deep, deep rooted problem of gerrymandering, because that's first and foremost where the problem starts.
Well, it's inspirational to imagine a world where we are focused on functional government and finding solutions and honoring the Ohio Constitution. When you're talking about the home rule, that just seems like it's just continued to be chipped away. And
It's
so
not eons ago that our Ohio State House was known for a number of moderate to progressive Republicans and moderate to conservative Democrats. They reflected the districts they came from, before they were super gerrymandered like they are now. As I said, we've had gerrymandering forever, but we haven't had this super gerrymandering that we have now that drives the election process only to the primaries. And if you survive your primary, you're safe. You don't have to worry about the general electorate. That's what we're dealing with. But when you look at some of those state legislators who serve the state so very well, like Joan Lawrence, like Joanne Davidson, like Bill Heinig, a very conservative conservative Democrat from Tuscarawas County, one of the best tax and budget experts the state house ever had. He was a conservative Democrat. Well, those are extinct species in Ohio today, and they ought not be. If we can bring back districts that give some hope to competitiveness, that give some hope to moderation and balance, we can rescue our state from this ever downward cycle, this ever downward trajectory of meanness and partisanship and craziness that that 8% approval rating of Congress exemplifies. That's, you know, the rating of our state house isn't much higher than that, believe me, today. People understand that.
So one of the things I wondered about is you served as a state legislator and, you know, I mentioned earlier that you were on the Constitutional Modernization Commission. And I wondered about kind of things that are happening behind the scenes, conversations in the hallways. You know, how is it that legislators actually feel about gerrymandering? Is it different than what kind of the leadership talks about? Or is there, you know, I'm just trying to get my head around how it's obviously cheating and unfair and impacting not just our elections, but public policy.
I believe that if you could take our 99 state representatives and our 33 state senators and put them on truth serum, injected them with a vial of truth serum and hooked them up to a lie detector box and asked them if they believe that we need redistricting reform, it would be an overwhelming yes. They consider themselves captives of this prison that we've built of super gerrymandered districts. And most of those that I served with, and I was only there for 4 years, from 2013 through 2016, but I still am in communication with a lot of folks who are there now. You know, it's not very many members of Congress or state legislators who will step out and run counter to the prevailing wind of their party's leadership. And they would like, I think they'd like us to rescue them from the prison that they're in. There are very few Liz Cheneys out there who will take a bold step that she knew was going to cost her seat in Congress, you know, by just stating the obvious of what January 6th was all about. There aren't very many members who will do that, but they want it done. I believe they, you know, now I'm an optimist by nature. I can certainly be proven wrong. I choose to live in the bucket of hope and not the bucket of despair and cynicism. That's a bucket I don't want to live in. And but I think that most members of the General Assembly believe that if we qualify this issue for the November 5 ballot, which we're going to do, that it will pass because it's apparent to people that our system is broken. And I think that while the leadership will raise and pour whatever kind of money they can into defeating this issue, that the rank and file will not nearly be as exercised to defeat it as leadership will be, because they understand the prison they're living in.
One of the things that makes me more cynical has to do with our recent history with the August special election, where supermajorities in both chambers wanted to take away, you know, our right to, you know, making it really challenging for us to engage in direct democracy and certainly ending majoritarian rights. Do you have thoughts about that?
Well, I do. The effort to strip citizens of their initiative rights, especially their constitutional initiative rights, has been a nationwide effort led by far right billionaires. These people come with money and they come with an agenda, and you know, they get state house leaders in some states to do what they want them to do. This idea did not originate with the leaders in the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate. It originated out of state. We fortunately, though, we saw the same kind of effort get smashed in South Dakota, where the initiative was founded back in the late 1880s, and got smashed in Ohio. People understood what it was all about. I do not think that those ideas were indigenous within the State House. They were brought to them, just like a lot of legislation is brought to legislators from various think tanks across the ideological spectrum. It was not a homegrown initiative, not in the least.
Well, this is a question from someone who's on this Huddle today. Not many journalists become politicians like you did. What is your opinion about the career move for other journalists? Should they be thinking about it as well?
No journalist, working journalist should be thinking about running for office, and I didn't. I was a working journalist for 38 years at the Dispatch. I was wrapping up my newspaper career at the Dispatch, and I was looking to go into some volunteer work, some nonprofit work, some work for causes that I believed in. And lo and behold, in 2011, as the legislature was drawing new districts based on the 2010 census, as I was no longer a working journalist, I saw what? A brand new House district drawn around where I lived with no incumbent. And I wouldn't have considered running if there were an incumbent there of either party, because I knew them all. I had covered them all. But I was looking for something new to do, something that would be challenging and interesting. And here was this new 17th House district, an old 17th House district that encompassed the area where I lived, encompassed much of West Columbus, where I grew up in South Columbus. And I thought, this could be interesting. I never went to grad school. The cards never worked for me. I got my bachelor's in journalism, did my journalism career. And because of a busy career and raising a family, I just didn't have time to go back to school, although I had thought about it from time to time. And so here was an institution that had an open seat. And I had been a registered independent for all of my journalism career, never voted in a primary because I don't think people who cover politics ought to vote in primaries. And but I'd grown up in an Irish Catholic Democratic family where JFK was the guy. And I looked at this district, and of course it was a Democratic leaning district, and that was in the DNA that I grew up with. And so I called up Armand Budish, who was then the House Democratic leader, and said, "Do you have a young up and comer? Do you have somebody for that seat?" And he said, "No." Then I called Mayor Coleman and John O'Grady, county commissioner, were the two de facto leaders of the Franklin County Democratic Party at that time, and said, "Do you have somebody that you're looking at for that seat?" Because I wouldn't, as the old bird that I am, want to be in the way of a young up and comer. And they said, "No, we don't have anybody lined up for that seat." And I said, "Well, if you're looking for a warm body to run for that seat, I'll consider it." And so, quite frankly, it was an opportunity. I wasn't butting anybody else out of the way because it was there. And I did have some interest in the Constitutional Modernization Commission. I had studied it. I'd written about the Constitutional Revision Commission of the 1970s that existed from 1970 to 1977 and brought some tremendous reforms, like tandem election of governor and lieutenant governor, like taxing ag land at ag value. We got about 18 amendments to the Ohio Constitution from the 1970s commission. And I'm sorry for my filibuster here, but context is important. And I had written some columns and some editorials at the paper about it might be time to revisit the idea of fundamental constitutional reform to deal with issues that weren't issues back then. We were talking about merit selection. We were talking about revisiting term limits. We were talking about fundamental tax reform. So I'd gone to Speaker Batchelder because he had served on that 1970s commission. He knew all about it, and he was the foremost state constitutional scholar in the General Assembly. He was interested in it, and he was so interested in it that he sponsored the bill. How often does a House Speaker sponsor a bill? Almost never. Where Bill Batchelder was interested in the concept, so he sponsored the bill to create the Ohio Constitutional Modernization Commission in 2011. So when I ran and got elected to my seat, one of the first questions they ask you when you come in the door is what committees would like to be assigned to. And my answer is, I don't care what committees you assign me to, but I would like to have a seat on the Constitutional Modernization Commission because, quite frankly, I helped create it. So I was given a seat on the Constitutional Modernization Commission, and we looked at fundamental reforms up and down the line that could have created some good reforms in this state. But the truth of the matter is that Keith Faber, who was then the Senate president, Ohio Senate president, didn't like the idea of the commission, thought it could create problems. And so after we were in existence for several years, he pulled the plug on it by not putting money in the state budget for it, and it expired. But we were looking at fundamental reforms on constitutional initiatives, statutory initiatives. As you know, Catherine, I floated the idea of whether we should have a somewhat higher, not 60%, but somewhat higher threshold, perhaps 55, for constitutional amendments in exchange for a much relaxed standard for statutory initiatives.
Yeah.
Because a statutory initiative is seldom used, because the General Assembly can kill it the day after it's enacted if we enact a statutory initiative reform. So we were dealing with fundamental things, and Democrats and Republicans in a spirit of bipartisanship, in a spirit of what hard things can we do. And I was interested in at least taking a look at the extension of term limits beyond 8 years, because we had lost so much institutional memory, and so many long-serving people. I cited Bill Heineck, for example, who was the foremost scholar on state budget and tax matters in our General Assembly, served for the better part of 3 decades. You don't replace that in 8 years. You just don't. And I don't know what the answer was, but the fact that we were dealing with those kinds of fundamental questions was a good thing. And so I'm sorry for the length of my answer, but my interest in being part of an effort that finally tries to solve the pernicious effects of gerrymandering really was continually inspired by work on that Constitutional Modernization Commission.
Well, I know we didn't get to everyone's question, but this is going to be the last one because we have volunteer appreciation right after this. So this is the question that I've been thinking a lot about, where, history in Ohio of the ballot board, and what do we expect going in, once we file and we're on our way to the ballot. That stop at the ballot board is often a place where things end up being the language ends up being really manipulated. And I just wondered about what you thought about the history of the ballot board, and gosh, what we should do to prepare for the ballot board this year.
Well, the ballot board was a reform of that 1970s Constitutional Revision Commission, because prior to that, the Secretary of State himself, there was never a woman in that office, the Secretary of State himself basically had, kingly-like powers over putting together ballot language. And so the creation of a 5-member ballot board was seen as a reform of its time. And it, for the most part, worked for a number of years. But as we've seen, like so many of our core institutions, has become more and more politicized, and has been less and less fair and balanced. We don't have Lady Justice with the blindfold on anymore at the ballot board. We have the thumbs on the scale. So your question is right on target. I haven't looked at what other states do, in terms of trying to enforce a fair and impartial ballot language writing process, but I would be interested in that, because we've certainly experienced our problems with it over the last several election cycles, and it's a problem that needs to be solved. But in all candor, I've not devoted any research into that problem, but it deserves a lot of it.
Well, on that note, as we think about moving ahead, I wanted to say a big thank you to you, Mike. One of the things that we'd like to do is share some of the questions that we have, and hoping that you'll do a kind of short, answers to those questions. And then the other thing that we need to do is not just celebrate Mike Curtin, the volunteer, but move on to the other volunteers. So Mike, last month was volunteer appreciation, and I'm going to have Mia take it away to tell you all about, all of the wonderful volunteers.
Yes, thank you. Give me 1 second here. Yes, we are extremely excited well, first of all, thank you, Mike and Catherine, and thanks everyone for your excellent questions. We're in such a privileged position in Ohio. Despite the terrible gerrymandering, we have a really unique group of redistricting warriors who care a lot about this issue and have been fighting to improve our situation here in Ohio by ending gerrymandering for a really long time and have been willing to go into battle multiple times over multiple years. And, we want to just every day we get more wonderful pictures of the great work that you're doing. We love to see it. We love to hear about all the ways and places that you are collecting signatures. We celebrate you. We love to see all the counties that you're in. We love the media attention. We love this crate with a filing system for counties. It's just awesome. We know that it is kind of impossible, in fact, actually impossible to thank every single volunteer individually or in any way to have a winner of volunteer appreciation. We want to genuinely recognize every single person. I made this hilarious attempt to make a list of all our volunteers. I got to half of them. This is a lot of work, people. This takes a lot of work. These are individual text boxes with all of these names in here. But this is just kind of a testament to how amazing you are. And it's not just, volunteers who are collecting signatures. It's our regional leaders who we deeply, deeply appreciate, people who are organizing and leading in, all across the county, regional leaders and then local leaders, the people who are handing out booklets and checking them back in at office hours, the people who are driving petitions around, the people who are posting things on social media, people who are making graphics, who are doing mobilize events, who are leading their teams in all kinds of ways. So we asked for nominations, and it's funny because even that is work. And some of you really stepped up and you wrote some wonderful things about volunteers that you cared about. This is, some of the people who were nominated. We would love to have everybody be a winner, but we decided there was absolutely no way to rank this in any way at all. So we're going to pick one name out of a hat, but we also wanted to just highlight one person who was nominated from each of the 7 regions around the state where we distribute and collect petition booklets. So Elizabeth Warner from League of Women Voters put together these beautiful slides of 7 volunteers. Think of this as among the nominees, just somebody we picked. It's not an endorsement of a winner or anything like that. It's just somebody. We had a picture, we had a quote, we had their permission, and we want to tell you a little bit about what the people said when they were nominating them. So I'll turn over to Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mia. By the way, reading these was incredible. My heart grew 10 sizes. So thank you to everybody for nominating people. So the person who nominated Amanda said, Amanda jumped right into action from the beginning. She got her Form 15 and will drive petitions anywhere and asks me all the time how she can help. So shout out to all our Form 15 warriors there. Thank you. Catherine.
So Amanda's in Cuyahoga County. We have Liz Nalepa from Mahoning County. And there was a long nomination statement written for Liz. I'm just going to summarize it and say, Liz has a lot going on in her life, but she continues to excel as a leader and a volunteer. I love her. That is a beautiful, beautiful statement. Next up.
Catherine.
Oh, no, this is back to you, Elizabeth.
Oh, is it on me? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Nancy Gurney from Ottawa County, her nominator said she is passionate about citizens, not politicians, and has promoted it by leading Ottawa County petition distribution, setting up petition events, and doing citizens, not politicians talks. Thank you, Nancy.
This is Jack Petrella from Medina County. He was nominated by Mosey Welch, and I just have to shout out that Mosey nominated a lot of people, and she put a lot of effort into describing why she was nominating them, and I just want to appreciate that. This is a short portion of what Mosey wrote about Jack. Jack Petrella is a Vietnam-era veteran who dedicates himself to collecting signatures for citizens, not politicians, 2 to 4 days a week. No matter where Jack collects signatures, he gets the signatures because of his ability to talk plain language with anybody who comes his way and to break down the issue of gerrymandering and why we need fair districts in Ohio. Thank you, Jack and Mosey. Oh, yeah.
This is Sandy Summer from Hamilton County, and I don't know if you all just saw it in the chat. Sandy just said she is just a few away from getting 1,000 signatures, which is amazing. So her nominator said, and actually there's a lot of words, I'm also going to condense it. She approaches everyone. She's tireless. She communicates clearly. She's fearless. Fearless is a great descriptor of all of you. Thank you, Sandy.
And this is Peggy Nagel, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, from Montgomery County, nominated by Mel Rodriguez. She not only hosts a weekly signing event, but she has done behind the scenes admin, answering questions on social media sites, etc. She also stepped up to hand out and collect petitions when I was out of town. She also helps try to recruit volunteers as opportunities present. Lastly, flagging events that may be a good signing opportunity. Thank you so much, Peggy.
And finally, we have Andrea Yagoda from Delaware County. Her nominator said she is out every day, all caps, every day, validates her signatures, sends postcards if signers aren't a registered voter, makes buttons and graphics, and shares with everyone, extremely knowledgeable on the topic. Enormous energy and dedication, deserves this recognition. And then another person said, you know Andrea, ... smiley face. And if you do know Andrea, that's exactly right. So thank you, Andrea. And we just wanted to share these pictures too. And I know Andrea's not here, but hopefully she'll see this later. We think she might actually be magic because look at who she hangs out with.
And any guesses as to where Andrea is right now and what she's doing? Yes, that is correct. She is out collecting signatures. So what we did is we had a whole bunch of people nominated, but in true Fair Districts style, a lot of them said, oh, I don't want the spotlight on me. There's so many other people who are doing so much more than I am. Honestly, that was like a pretty common response. So we managed to get a few people who actually agreed to be in our pool here. And we've written their names on pieces of paper. And I am going to pull one name out of the hat, which that person is going to get a $100 gift certificate for a restaurant of their choice and this beautiful Fair Districts baseball cap. So without further ado, here we go. I'm drum roll, please. And the winner is Patricia Walker. Yay! So
congrats.
That is that. We are so excited. We will be in touch with you, Patricia. We will get your hat to you and your gift certificate. Of course, we could not end this without giving you some information about something that's coming up soon. You probably got an email about it today. We're having 3 events, which the purpose of this event is not just to be Fair Districts, it's all of the groups that are collecting. It's AFL-CIO, ACLU, OEA, OOC, all of the acronyms are all collecting. And we're coming together and we're meeting in places where we really could use help closing out those counties. So this doesn't have to be only people who live in Chillicothe or Lima or Mansfield. Anywhere in Ohio, please come and join us. There'll be like a little rally, there'll be some refreshments, there'll be some swag, and then there'll be opportunities to collect drive-throughs, going to local stores and libraries, and also knocking doors. So there's registration links here. We'll send them to you. And also they will, you should have gotten an email about them today. If you haven't started collecting signatures yet, you can also find a place to sign at mobilize.us, Citizens Not Politicians. If you haven't started collecting yet, I think it skipped that slide. Yes, it did skip that slide, sorry. Yes, there's some information about that here. One final training next week. And then next month, we're going to have Dave Daly join us at the huddle, and we're excited about that. And that is it. We are going to send you a follow-up with a recording and the slides, and we will send the questions that you had for Mike to him, and hopefully he will be able to answer those for you. And we just appreciate all of you, and we're so excited that, you know, we got to do an official appreciation, and I hope that every single volunteer feels appreciated, even if you didn't come away with the purple cap.
Mia, may I suggest one thing?
Yes.
This map that is behind me, I made available to Catherine. I'm happy to make it available to anybody, but Catherine has it, and it's a public domain map. I worked with a graphic artist to develop it, and so if folks on this call would like a copy of that map, PDF of that map, I'm sure that we can find a way to be responsive to those requests. And it's as I say, it's a great handy way to show people what gerrymandering is and what we're up against.
Awesome. We will send it out to everybody in case they're able to print it. We'll also make some copies available for folks as well. Very good. Thank you all so much. We appreciate everybody here, and thank you. I think that's it.
Oh, and definitely join us in June. Dave Daly is an interesting guy. And during 2018, he actually came to Ohio when we were working on congressional redistricting reform. So he's been following our experiment in democracy for a while and wants to know what's going to happen this year. So this is the author of Rat Eft. Definitely worth taking your time. We'll see you at the next huddle. And a big thank you to you all for all you're doing. We're almost there.
And in addition, next month on the huddle, we're also going to have someone from Common Cause National come and talk about what's happening in other states that are looking to start the process of moving towards a Citizens Redistricting Commission. Because we've heard about the ones that already have commissions, but there's quite a few states that are kind of heading that direction, and we're going to get some information about that as well. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good
Talk
evening.
to you later.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
again. Bye.